Good morning, YouTube. My name is Andrew. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be starting the teardown process on my father's 442 revival build. Would you like to say hi to the people? Say good morning. It's cold. I got my stick. German Shepherds hate being inside, regardless of temperature. Joey did start the pellet stove last night because of how cold it was going to be, and it ran all night. We are sitting at a crisp 70-ish degrees, which is very nice. A bunch of the parts that we ordered did get delivered for the car, so I'll be going through those and opening those boxes up later in the video. But for now, we are going to get started tearing down the 442. First thing I'm going to begin with is getting the transmission out of the car. Finally, we can start getting some wrenches on this thing and taking it apart. This is probably going to be the most fun, but we're just going to start by dropping the drive shaft and we'll move forward, drain the transmission fluid, and keep going. Let's get these bolts off on the U-joint, connecting the drive shaft to the rear end. The first nut has been loosened on the project. Drive shaft is out. Our drive shaft is out of the car. I just wrapped the end because fluid, there was some here on the tail housing from the Turbo 400. Now we're gonna take our oil drain and get the transmission fluid out so I can start taking the lines off and disconnecting it from the car. Let's crack the tranny pan plug. There's no miles on this car after it was technically rebuilt like 20 years ago. Maybe there were 6 miles total. This transmission fluid is super clean. I don't see anything sparkling. If it was a questionable transmission, I would take a fluid sample and see if there's any metal in there. But like I said, this was all redone. It's just leaking because it's sat for so long. All right. Now I'm gonna get access to our torque converter bolts. I've taken off this little access cover. I'm gonna crack these free with a wrench. Let's leave that one loose. What color are we? Oh, all right. Of course, the rear main is wet. We'll be taking care of that here while we're building this car. Another kind of issue, our transmission linkage. It is pretty soft and sloppy when it comes to putting the car in gear. It would help if there was a cotter pin in there, huh? I think my least favorite part of pulling transmissions is always getting the torque converter bolts out, because you got to be like super wide. You got to hook your bar or your ratchet onto the front of the crank and then counter hold it, trying to get the bolts out. It's my least favorite part of taking the transmission out, is dealing with torque converter bolts. We got our 1.25" socket on the front crank bolt. Now it's time to get these bolts out. That way we can continue removing our transmission. Too bad. Torque converter bolts are out. On to the next step. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is called the governor, but this is what controls the shifting for the transmission, and it's based off of engine vacuum. So I'm just going to take this line off real quick. I believe I can pry it off with a clip tool like that. It should come right off. Old rubber. Let's see. There we go. That's out of the way. Bend this. Okay, one last thing. Next, the transmission cooler lines are tucked up in there pretty far, and to get a good angle on that, I'm probably gonna end up getting ATF on my cameras, and I would prefer not to do that, so I'm just gonna unhook them real quick, but you can see them both right up there. We got our cooler lines unhooked. We got them wrapped in a glove and zip tied out of our way. All we got left transmission-wise is unhook the linkage here, disconnect the speedometer cable on the back, then the rear transmission mount and the bell housing bolts should come out. Speedo cable is real simple. Just get your favorite pair of pliers, break the actual collar free. Don't squeeze too hard because this one looks like it's plastic. It may be metal. And once you break it free, just unthread it. Now, that's easier said than done. Got it unthreaded there and pull it out. Speedometer cable is removed. And as you saw before in the video, the linkage was missing a cotter pin, so I literally just pulled it right out of the yoke here, or whatever this is called. Now we'll get our transmission jack and get this cross member out and the bell housing bolts. Transmission should come out. So I was hoping to not have to mess with the exhaust at all until I already got the transmission out, but unfortunately I did have to loosen the exhaust to get the cross member out. It's just too tight under there. Even it being an older car with all this room, you got to take the exhaust down just to get the cross member out. I unbolted the flange here right at the manifold. Got the passenger side down. The driver's side, I will say, it's hard to see from here, but that bolt on this side, hold on, let me just get over here. So this bolt here on that side, on the bottom of the manifold, is very close to the frame rail and to this mount right here for the lower control arm. So that one I had to be done by hand with a wrench that just fit. So that wasn't fun. This is what we need for bell housing bolts. It's about 3 feet worth of extensions. And I'm taking them out from the back, obviously, but they're all the way back there. So I cracked the one on the other side free. These are actually pretty loose. They were tight, but they weren't, you know, super snug. But removing the bell housing bolts, and we should be able to lower the transmission. Hopefully I don't have to pull the dipstick out in order to get the transmission, but we won't know until we get them out. The transmission is out of the car. Unfortunately, it was a little bit of a pain in the butt because I had to deal with the dipstick tube that I didn't remove, and the transmission was actually kind of sliding on the jack, and it wasn't really sitting, I would call it center of gravity. So I threw a ratchet strap on it. I didn't film removing it because I am working by myself right now until Joe is available later. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get kind of all this fluid cleaned up and put some of these tools away that I don't really need right now. That way I can start moving on to the next steps in order to get the engine out of the car. I don't really know much about what was done with this transmission. I asked my dad when he was in here before, and he said that he thinks it has 99,000 miles on it. We don't know if the guys who worked on the car years ago actually went through the transmission, if they changed anything. It looks pretty dirty, but that just could be from sitting, or that they just removed it and it was never serviced. I know stuff was done to the engine to make it more of a rebuilt engine. So who knows? I mean, driving it up and down the street, it worked pretty good. There was no shift issues or anything. But for right now, we're kind of just going to clean the transmission up, reseal it, do the rest of the stuff on the car, put it back in, and if it eventually has an issue, we'll deal with it at that time. We got the transmission stuff out of the way. Did put away a lot of the tools that were out because we're going to start getting ready to pull this engine. Joe is available now, so we're going to prep the car, get it protected, and then get the hood off and start disassembling so we can remove the motor. Hood's off. Now it's time to start taking this apart. But we'll get the radiator out first, and then we'll start pulling accessories off of the engine and get ready to yank it, I guess. Pretty simple. me and Joey got the engine out of the 442 and onto the engine hoist. We have it set on an engine stand right now. Big blocks, they're really, really cool right up until you figure out how heavy these things really are. Engine is on the engine stand. It is bolted right here. Now, maybe there is a different plate, an adapter plate that goes on this stand. This is a 1,000 pound rated stand. This engine probably doesn't weigh 1,000 pounds. If I had to take a guess, I'd say it's somewhere around 500. Maybe there's a different adapter plate that can go on the stand. That way the actual arms connected to it can go lower here on the block so that the center here is kind of more center where the crankshaft is. But this is exactly what it looked like when Joe's 428 was on this stand. Now, I did put a big jack stand underneath, and we're going to leave the hoist on it overnight because I'm not working on it anymore. I'm not going to tear this down at all tonight. I'm going to wait for the next video to start tearing the engine down. Mechanically, the thing's in great condition. Now, it does leak fluids. We will be taking care of that. We did get a new oil pan gasket and crank seals. This rear main is definitely leaking here, and in order to get that, you can push the rope seal through, but we're probably just going to loosen the main caps and actually lower the crank. We also did that on the other engine, but you can just see how bad the paint job is on this engine. It looks horrendous. They did it with a brush. They just slopped it on there. This here, this would be the driver's side header. It's going to be hard to see. I'll see if I get a flashlight in there. I did get a flashlight. What you'll see is there's actually a flap right here in this header. Let me just get the camera underneath there. Bear with me because it's kind of a tough angle. Right there. So it looks like there's a flap inside the exhaust. I tried to move it. It's kind of frozen. I don't know if it has to deal with the linkage or if it's just rusty. We're going to do some research and see if we can get some headers that are very similar to the stock ones, only because we don't want to have to deal with a ton of fitment issues on this car. If you get a nice long tube header or even a medium tube, then it's going to come into a problem where we're going to have issues with the frame rail. When I was removing the transmission, I pointed out that this stud here was very hard to get to in order to get the nut off because of where the lower mount is for the control arm. So I don't know if we're going to be able to find a decent header that'll fit in there. Joe was pointing out here on the engine that the freeze plugs, all the paint's chipping off. They're probably okay. We may just replace the freeze plugs as well. On the passenger side header, this is, I don't know if this is for an old school EGR for emissions or if this is just to get heat to send it up to the carburetor, to the air cleaner, so it's easier starting when it's cold. That's another reason why we might just get rid of these headers and hopefully find one that fits the same. We'll get new fasteners, so probably ARP studs. After looking over the entire intake and how it's chipping, the actual thermostat housing here, the inlet, that's been leaking, that gasket's shot, so we're going to get a new water inlet here, and we're just going to get new intake gaskets and pull the whole intake off. We'll strip the paint on everything. We already have new valve covers. They're in one of those boxes over there. The distributor, this is brand new. It probably has less than 3 hours of runtime. I put this on a couple years ago, I'd say 2 or 3 years ago. So there's no problems there. And when I did the distributor, I also did the spark plugs, and I just zip tied all the wires. So we'll get some sort of nice setup for the wires, but all in all, it's pretty much just an overhaul, reseal, paint it, make it look clean. I did speak to March Performance. I didn't order the belt setup only because they couldn't give me a definite answer on which setup would actually fit the 400 Oldsmobile motor. They have a kit for the 350 Rocket and they have a kit for the 455, but nobody there could tell me if one of those kits will fit on the 400. They said there might be an issue with deck height. So I have to do a little bit more research into this engine and see if I can find a correct 6-rib setup for it. But most of this is going to be getting deleted. And like we showed earlier in the video, somehow somebody bent the actual power steering pulley. I don't know, it looks like there was a pry bar that was placed against it. So either way, that's probably what our noise was, and that's why that's all getting replaced. We upgraded to electric fans, which is in our Griffin Performance box here. So we no longer need a fan clutch or the shroud. That's all included with the new kit. Going over to the transmission itself, relatively simple. If you look on the back side over here, this tail shaft housing was leaking at some point, so we're probably going to just get some new seals for this, maybe wire wheel it, clean it up, and, get a new pan gasket on it, refill it. We're not really going to do too much with the transmission. The only thing we do have to upgrade is, since It originally has a mechanical speedometer. We're going to upgrade this to an output for a sensor so we can send this to our new instrument cluster and have a digital speedometer. This right here, I believe this is for our reverse lights. Everything else on this it's mechanical. It's a pretty simple transmission. I was going to open a bunch of the boxes so far that we've received for the car, but it happens to be Sunday. It's 8 o'clock. It's snowing outside. Joey has to work all night tonight, and I have to work all day tomorrow. So I'll just open some of those boxes when we begin the next video, which is the teardown for this engine. If anybody knows a serpentine belt setup that fits on an Oldsmobile 400 block, please feel free to leave it in the comments section down below. I will do my own research and hopefully find a setup that we can get that will fit this engine. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.